Learning Society. How many of you are new to lifelong learning? Great. How many are you new to Daphne's class? Great. Well, welcome. You're in for a real treat. We are happy to have Daphne Nikolopoulos with us once again. She's the author of the Sarah Weston Chronicles archaeological thriller series. Whew, that was a mouthful. Her series and the books in the series are The 10th Saint and the Riddle of Solomon. Her next two novels, an interactive historical novel about the fall of Israel's united monarchy titled The Judgment, and the third installment in the Sarah Weston Chronicles titled The Oracle, will be published in 2015. Today, as you were coming in, the greeters were handing out cards. We are conducting a drawing for 10 advanced reader copies of the Oracle, which will be coming out in late 2015. If you did not receive a ticket coming in from one of our greeters to be entered into the drawing, please raise your hand and they will hand one to you now. Or if you have one that you filled out, they'll also collect it. So we have one right here, Wendy. Daphne has also brought some special gifts for those who purchase her two current books that we have on sale today outside. And that would be The 10th Saint and the Riddle of Solomon. And the books will be on sale after the lecture, and Daphne will be signing books. Daphne is a journalist who has worked in Europe and the US. She is currently the editor-in-chief of Palm Beach Illustrated magazine and editorial director of Palm Beach Media Group. She's a native of Athens, Greece, and she has traveled and lived in various parts of the world and taken courses in classical studies at the University of Athens, and has a degree in international business from the University of Central Florida. And we are happy to welcome her back once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Cami. Can everyone hear me? I'll just click on this mic. Okay, perfect. Okay. Sorry, I'm gonna just get a little situated here. Turn my pointer. As Cami mentioned, obviously I'm Daphne Nikolopoulos. I write under a pseudonym called DJ Niko, but I am the same person, I promise. And some of you may know me from my work with Palm Beach Illustrated magazine. As you heard from Cami, I'm the editor-in-chief there, and editorial director of the group of magazines, the publishing company that publishes a group of magazines, rather, based in West Palm Beach. And so that's kind of my, my local connection. But what I do beyond that is write fiction. And all of my fiction actually has historical themes, and more specifically, ancient historical themes. And what I like to do as an author is to bring the places and people of antiquity to life. Because I think that the ancient world has a whole lot to teach us, and it also has a lot of, I guess, question marks as well, because obviously history wasn't recorded then the way it is now. So, so there's a lot about antiquity we don't know. So by examining things like archaeological studies and the writings of the ancients, I get a lot of facts, but it also helps me to sort of extrapolate what their emotions and their inner worlds were like back then, and that's what my fiction is all about. Obviously, it's you know, some history and some speculation. So, as just by way of background, as you heard, my third book in the series, the archaeological thriller series, is called The Oracle. And it takes place in Greece, as you might have guessed, more specifically in Delphi, which is in central Greece. And there I will be delving into the world of not only ancient Greece, but also the worship of Apollo, who was a sun god, via the Oracle of Delphi, which was a very famous agency of priestesses who literally changed the course of history. Now that part is not fiction. It is recorded history. It's actually been very well documented by various sources, and it's really quite fascinating. And that's what I will be basing today's lecture on, is some of my research for that book. So let's talk about oracles. The concept of oracular revelation goes back thousands of years. In ancient societies, it was actually a way of communicating with the unseen. the all-powerful, if you will. When it came to important decisions like politics or war or interpersonal relationships even, such as, for example, whether or not to enter into a marriage, it was actually unthinkable to make up one's own mind without consulting with a higher power. So everyone wanted answers from the beyond, and in a way they still do. I mean, if you think about it, divination is actually very fundamental to human nature, and it's very much a part of our society even now. I mean, every culture seems to have its own ritual. I mean, here in America, there are psychics, there are tarot card readers, and even business intuitionists, which we'll talk about a little bit later. In Greece, where I come from, there are all sorts of methods of divination. The most common being reading the coffee grounds. You know, after you have your coffee, you sort of turn it over and you can read the grounds. And certain animist cultures, such as desert dwellers, for example, they read omens from nature to understand what is in store for them in the future. And in a place like Africa, they might cast lots, like Nikolopoulos. And all over the world, of course, people interpret dreams as messages from the beyond. We, as a people, are obsessed with knowing the future. And the more uncertain the times, the more people seek answers. And that is perhaps why divination was so popular in ancient societies. As boundaries were being drawn and redrawn, and people were fighting for supremacy, uncertainty was a part of life. War, disease, pestilence, I mean, these were things that were all too common, and people didn't have control over them then, like they do now. So they needed guidance. So since common men did not have access to deities, and indeed were actually forbidden from talking to them directly, there were a few individuals who had the power to communicate with deities, with the gods. They were specially appointed priests and priestesses, and they operated in secret centers where they delivered prophecies. They were called oracles. So oracle actually is a term. It comes from the Latin orare, and it is a term that refers to two things: to an individual who was kind of a channel for the word of a deity, of a god, so to speak. So it would be like a human oracle, if you will. And then the prophecy that that person would have delivered would have been called an oracle as well. So it's kind of an interchangeable term. An oracle, in its human form, actually spoke divinely inspired utterances. So it was different than a seer or a clairvoyant, because he or she, this oracular priestess, would not interpret signs. We talked earlier about things like knuckle bones and coffee grounds and tarot cards. But in these divinations, there were no physical objects to manipulate or interpret. Oracles were trained, purified, and in some cases, like we'll hear about later, even drugged so that they could be conduits for the god's words. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the most prominent of antiquity's oracles. We're going to learn about their means of foretelling the future, and also how their word shaped ancient societies. So the four I'd like to go into are Dodona, which was the most ancient oracle in Greece. It was dedicated to Zeus. And Ammon, which is the oracle of Zeus Ammon, who was a kind of a different form of the god Zeus. And it was situated in Libya's Siwa desert. Delphi, which is the most important oracle, I'd say, in all of the ancient world, and not surpassed, I think, by anywhere. And it was, of course, dedicated to Apollo. And then, for fun, I wanted to throw in a kind of a lesser-known one called the Oracle of Trophonius, which is also Greek, and a little bit of a mystical cult that's held sway in central Greece. So we're going to hear about all of those. But let's start with Dodona. This site is actually located in the Epirus region, which is in northwestern Greece, as you can see there. It's about 10 miles south of Ioannina, which is a fairly large Greek city, and it's at the foot of Mount Tomaros. And it was said to have been inhabited from the 3rd millennium BCE. And it was in such a beautiful and mystical spot that it was devoted to the worship of the Earth Mother. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, it is the earliest of all oracular sites in Greece, and it was different in a few ways. First of all, in the beginning, it was administered by the Pelasgians, who were, I guess, the earliest Greeks. They were the inhabitants before Greece became Greece and before the Greek language was spoken, and they actually lived in the region. They were kind of considered barbarians, if you will, whereas the Greeks sort of led the world in thought and philosophy and science and arts. These people really, weren't like that. They weren't developed in that way. And they existed, of course, also before the advent of the Greek pantheon, the 12 gods of Mount Olympus, if you will. So according to the historian Herodotus, who I think probably most of you have heard of, Dodona itself existed before the gods did. And so he said, after a long lapse of time, the names of the gods came to Greece from Egypt. Not long after the arrival of the names, they sent to consult the oracle at Dodona about them. This is the most ancient oracle in Greece, and at the time, there was no other. So this was, we have now affirmation that this was the one and only oracle, the one that sort of started it all. Now, Herodotus actually underscored the Egyptian connection, which is kind of interesting. He said that the origins of this oracle were Thebes, Thebes, Egypt, rather, because there's also a city in Greece called Thebes. So they came from Thebes, Egypt. He said that there were 2 sacred women, 2 priestesses, Egyptian ones, who were taken away by the Phoenicians, and one was taken right here to Dodona, and the other one was taken to Libya. Now we're going to hear a little bit about the Libyan side in a bit, but both sites basically were established as oracular centers. Now by about 2000 BCE, by sort of the turn of the 2nd millennium, the worship of the 12 gods on Mount Olympus was practiced fairly widely in Greece, and Greek civilization and language were in full force. So things changed in Dodona. So instead of the crude worship of the Earth Mother, the oracle was shifted to Zeus, who was of course the king of all gods. And the way this oracle went down was a little bit different than the others we were going to speak about. In other sites that happened later, the prophecies were channeled through an enlightened being, as we mentioned earlier, who spoke the words of the patron god or goddess. But in Dodona, there were priests, and later there were priestesses, but the prophecy was actually delivered through nature. You may have heard about the talking trees of Dodona. Has anybody heard of something of that nature? Maybe not. It's a little obscure. You have to really know your Greek mythology and history. But anyway, there were, according to some accounts rather, there was either a grove of oak trees or there was a single oak tree that was sacred to Zeus. But either way, the trees actually spoke the will of Zeus. So when the wind rustled the leaves, of course, they made these sounds, and the priests who were in attendance actually interpreted those sounds. And in addition to the trees themselves, there were talking vessels. And these were actually bronze vessels that were tied to the branches of the trees, and they were all in very close proximity. And when the wind blew, and let me tell you, the wind blows a lot in this part of Greece, because it's mountainous, but it's also, the exposure of it, they do get quite a lot of breezes. So every time the wind blew, they would strike each other and make these beautiful melodic sounds that would echo through the mountains. And so these were, of course, meant to be the whispers of Zeus. Now, when the sound stopped, they would be interpreted by the holy tenders of the shrine. So it's important to note that the early interpreters were priests, male priests, who have been described by some historians as creatures of the forest. They were supposed to have gone around barefoot, and they would sleep on the ground and never covered, and they would never wash their feet, like they would choose not to ever wash their feet. And they led this hand-to-mouth existence, and they were content with very little, basically whatever nature would provide. But that was, of course, in the days of the Earth Mother worship. But when the oracle became to Zeus and became more organized, the privilege of oracle delivery was granted to 3 priestesses called the doves. And the Greek word for them is Pleiades. But they've been written about quite extensively by Herodotus. And here's what he had to say. This is kind of the short version. It says, I expect that these women were called doves by the people of Dodona because they spoke a strange language. And the people thought it like the cries of birds. For how could a dove utter the speech of men? The tale that the dove was black signifies that the woman was Egyptian. So they were meant to be these black doves as opposed to the white doves we sort of have in our imagination most of the time. And this was a reference to the Egyptian origin of these priestesses. Because if you remember what we said earlier, this is how this oracle was actually founded. It was back in the days when the Phoenicians took the 2 sacred women and delivered one of them here. So apparently the priestesses were the the descendants, I guess is what you would say, of the Egyptian founders. So now visitors who came to inquire of the oracle would actually write their questions down on lead tablets. And they would hand them to the priests, and then the Pleiades, the doves, would listen to the trees for the signs. And they were, of course, the mouthpieces of Zeus, and they would deliver the oracles, and actually in hexameter verse, which is very unlikely, but this is how they would deliver their oracles, based on these signs from nature. So a lot of this, it sounds like it could be myth, but we don't know. Of course, this happened so long ago, and even Herodotus' writings were done so many years after the fact that we really don't know how much of it is fact and how much of it was actually embellished. But archaeologists have discovered a rich bounty on this site, and this is kind of a schematic of that site. You can see here that all of these structures actually date to the 4th century BCE, so they were, in ancient Greece, structures like this were built and rebuilt, but all of these date to the 4th century. They think that there had been structures that had been built even earlier than that, but really the true city dates back to those times. So you can see those ruins, even today, if you visit Dodona, there's the theater there. And there's the Vouleftirion, which is actually a type of parliament. This is where they would make their major decisions. And there's a stadium where they would hold these sporting games. And various temples to the Earth Mother, Gaia, which actually they're the one that's labeled as Dione, who was the wife of Dodonian Zeus. And then this is the temple of Zeus, and the temple of Hercules. So these are all in existence. It's actually a very fascinating site to visit. But some of the more fascinating objects who have been found in Dodona were the lead tablets inscribed with questions from the seekers. So we actually do have access to these. There are quite a few of them that have been found. One of them says, Parmenides, which is just a Greek name, asks Zeus Dodonius whether it would be better to stay at home. Now, what does that mean? I mean, who knows, right? I mean, that could have been anything. I mean, did he mean it's better to stay at home rather than go to war? Or did he mean, is it better to, just stay home rather than go and, go hunting or whatever? But you get the idea. They were fairly simple questions, usually about 1 sentence each. And the earliest of these actually date back to the 6th century BCE, and they're now on display. All of these tablets are on display at the Ioannina Museum, which is nearby the site. So, though several men of antiquity were said to have journeyed to Dodona, but the sanctuary never really took on the same prominence as Delphi, which we're going to talk about in a minute. but its prestige was unquestionable. Not only was it the earliest site, but it was also said to be the only site in all of Greece that was uncorrupted, meaning bribes were never accepted here, and there was no favoritism displayed for certain tribes, because that actually did happen at some other oracular centers. So Dodona's popularity and relevance actually lessened as Delphi's grew, but it persisted probably until the advent of Christianity. And the Christians actually were the ones who shut down the site, and they cut down the oak trees, and then erected basilicas where the temples of pagan worship once were. And there are actually basilicas, or the ruins of basilicas, on this site even today. So now, let's travel a little further south into Ammon. This is the site where the second Egyptian priestess was said to have been delivered, and it dates back to 3,000 years ago. Okay, so this is where it is. It's actually, right now it's located in Egypt, because boundaries, of course, have been redrawn so many times since antiquity. The Siwa oasis, it was in Libya back then. That's why all the references to Libya, but right now it lies within the Egyptian border. So the site, of course, is not easy to get to, because it is in the desert. And it actually made the journey to this oracle even more prestigious, because supplicants had to travel for several days by camel caravan just to reach this oracle. And it was often a very treacherous journey that did not end well. So, according to various ancient sources, the original form of the oracle at Siwa was the bezel of a ring, and it was decorated supposedly with C1 emeralds that were found near that site. And then later, the form became the head of a ram, which was symbolic of the Egyptian god Amun. And of course, Amun, or Amun-Ra, being the head deity of Egypt, also relates back to the head deity of Greece, who was Zeus. So there is a relationship there. So in the beginning, there was a legion of priests who were male and Libyan, and they would take their cue from the oracle symbols that I just mentioned, and they would give their answers then to the supplicants. Now, the oracle at Siwa was considered really important by the ancient Greeks as well. And it was considered as a very sacred site, second only to Dodona and to Delphi. And eventually the Greeks actually associated this site with Zeus, who was their head god, similar to the Egyptian head god. And many of the Greeks from antiquity are said to have journeyed here to get oracles. Perseus is one of them. He is said to have stopped off to visit the oracle prior to beheading Medusa, and Heracles, or Hercules, as most people know him, is thought to have visited before he went to fight Perseus. And there I have kind of circled the inner sanctum, which in Greek is called the aditon. You may, if you study this, you'll see that word quite a lot. And that is the inner sanctum that, where the oracles were actually given. And this is how you would enter, through this temple. This is what the temple actually looks like today. This is its ruins. But that is kind of a reconstruction of what it looked like in the day. But the most famous visitor to the temple of Zeus Ammon was Alexander the Great. Each of the pharaohs of Egypt's 28th dynasty had traveled to Siwa to be acknowledged at this temple as the son of Amun-Ra, the supreme god. And after being acknowledged, each one would be depicted as wearing the ram's horns that were symbolic of Amun on his head. Now, Alexander, because he, of course, invaded Egypt, or some parts of it, wanted the same declaration of divine power to legitimize his conquest of Egypt and put himself on the same footing as the pharaohs. So after establishing Alexandria in Egypt, which he famously did in 331 BCE, Alexander consulted the oracle in order to seek confirmation that he was indeed the son of Zeus Ammon, and therefore a legitimate ruler of both Egypt and all the other lands that he conquered. So he traveled to Siwa by crossing the desert and facing all the dangers associated with such a journey. And when he got there, it is said that he was received by the priest immediately as the son of Zeus. Without even uttering a word, the priest took a look at him and welcomed him as such, and asked him to pose 2 questions. And Alexander asked these 2 questions that you see on the screen. He wanted to know if any of Philip's assassins had gotten away unpunished, Philip, of course, being his father. And he also wanted to know whether he would conquer the entire world. Just, you know, a little bit of ego there, not much. But he got affirmative answers to both of these. Now, of course, after his visit to the oracle, whenever his image appeared on coins, which it widely did, and a lot of these coins are actually still in circulation. So Alexander was depicted with the horns of the ram, I think you can sort of see there and there. And this is, of course, symbolic of his status as the son of Ammon, or Zeus Ammon. So we know that Alexander actually consulted the oracle that one time, but he may have consulted it more than once. He had great regard for the place, apparently. And in fact, there's even conjecture that Alexander was taken to Siwa to be buried. And we still don't know where Alexander's tomb is, but his esteem for the place was so high that allegedly he had asked to be carried off there. Now, the oracle, of course, began in decline around the time of the Romans. And by the time that Strabo visited Siwa after the birth of Jesus Christ, he noted that the oracle was much in decline and was not as powerful as it had been in the past. And now the ruins of the oracle still exist today. You can see it there. They're accessible via climbing this path up the rock on which it sits. And you can see there that it's actually sitting on the very edge of that rock in a very precarious position. But it's actually remarkably well preserved, which is kind of wild considering that, that it was made out of sand and mud brick, and it still survives today. But such is the nature of the dry desert climate, a lot of these types of constructions are still preserved because they can be, there's no humidity. So now, let's go to Delphi. And this, of course, is perhaps the greatest and certainly the most influential and most famous oracle in ancient world. And it was right here in ancient Greece. This is it was actually at the foot of Mount Parnassus, which is kind of a very central mountain in Greece. And it was situated between 2 forbidding rocks called the Pleiades. This is them here, you can sort of see one of them. There's another one on the other side. And it's just kind of wedged in this middle of this mountainous region in a kind of a womb-like setting. The Pleiades, the rocks, actually kept the sanctuary sheltered from the rest of the world and made travel to Delphi very difficult. So visitors had to actually be very determined to reach it. And they were. I mean, there's no question that there are a lot of them who made the journey because we have record of some of the oracles that were received. So why here? Okay. So the legend says that Zeus, in wanting to know where the center of the earth was, unleashed 2 eagles. He sent one from the east and the other from the west and let them fly and decided that wherever they would meet would be the center of the earth. So the eagles actually, according to the ancient writings, actually collided above this site right here in Delphi and plummeted to the ground and fell inside a chasm in the earth. And since then, Delphi was known as the Omphalos, which translates to navel. So it was the Earth's navel or center. So dating back to early antiquity, Delphi was a site of pagan worship of a female deity or earth goddess. And that was very similar to Dodona, actually. So things changed around the 8th century, where it is said that Apollo was led here on a pursuit to to defeat a snake monster called Python, who was terrorizing the people and the land and sort of making all sorts of mischief. So Apollo let fly a single golden arrow, and it hit Python right in the eye, and of course, killed the snake and sent him plummeting down the same deep precipice that we talked about earlier. And then the sun god, Apollo, actually claimed the sanctuary for himself. So began the cult of Apollo right here in Delphi, and the worship of everything he stood for, which was light, reason, order, harmony, truth, healing, and prophecy. So the followers of Apollo proceeded to build an entire city in the god's honor. First came the sanctuary. That's it right here. It is this beautiful Doric temple, and inside it burned the eternal fire of Apollo, and it was tended to by a group of priests and later priestesses who were designated just for this job. That was all they did with their life. And then inside, you can't really see it here, but in the very back of the temple, you descend several steps down into the earth, actually, into the sort of core of the mountain, into the inner sanctum, the Adidon, as we said earlier. So down there is where all the prophecies would actually take place. So the Adidon, and I guess the temple itself, actually here, let me show you that this is what the city looks like today in modern Delphi. You can still see traces of the ancient city. That's just a reconstruction, but you can easily reconstruct it based on what's there. It's actually a very extensive archaeological site, and very beautiful at that. So the Adidon was, the inner sanctum was presided over by a single woman, a priestess, called the Pythia. And she was the mouthpiece of the god. So now I'm going to come back and let you know, come back to this point and let you know how it all worked. But first I want to digress a little bit and talk about the agency of the priestess. So women in ancient Greece were not revered. They were actually not common women anyway, priestesses maybe, but they were rather relegated to the background. And basically